Hey everybody, DJ here. Welcome back to DJ Tutorials, and today we're going to be talking about GPU optimization. We're going to be looking at a lot of things, not just overclocking, but also certain situations where you might want to just boost your fans or just a general understanding of how you can utilize your GPU as best as possible. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out and it's super easy for you to do. Just hit that little like button and the subscribe. And if you're interested, you can jump onto the Discord for any questions or to just share some ideas or renders. And we also have a Patreon community if you want to have early access to videos when they are released, or just to help offset the cost of making these videos that help everybody out, please consider donating. Both links are going to be below in the video description. So before we really begin, what I want to do is just let you know that we're going to be using two tools, and it's because I use an NVIDIA card that we're specifically going to be using this. So you'll want to go on to MSI.com and look for the Afterburner download. So I will put that link below in the video description along with the Kombustor. And this is going to be really to explain to you what overclocking is and some general ideas about how it works. And this works not just for NVIDIA cards, it also works for AMD cards. Now, AMD does have its own system for GPU performance, which is really, really cool. And it'll be in the AMD Radeon software, and you can do some auto overclocking and things like that. And if you go to the AMD website, I'll put a link to this also in the video description. You can kind of check this out. It's all basically the same stuff I'm going to show you. They just have their own system. And I used to have an AMD card, and I'll tell you that I really do wish NVIDIA had its own version like this because it really is a great interface and it's really easy to follow everything that's going on and just sort of like get all of your profiles up to what you want it to be and to also monitor while you're doing renders and stuff like that. So it is pretty great. It's worth it if you have an AMD card just to look through this, but everything I'm going to be talking about is also going to be something that you can see on here, like, fan curves and, power consumption and the voltage and clock speed, all that kind of stuff. It's all the same. So to begin with, what we're going to do is I'm not going to show you how to like install these things because that's pretty self-explanatory at this point. Hopefully you guys know how to install things into your computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up MSI Afterburner and take a look at this. So yours should look something like this, where you have a little dial over here on the left and a dial on the right, and you have a sort of monitoring software down here. So what this basically does is it's a way of you actually creating some profiles and setting some things like power limits and temperature settings and all this sort of stuff. And just a disclaimer, I'm not going to say that you'll never ever have any issues with your graphics card, okay? But what we're doing is nothing that's going to actually really damage your card. The things that we're going to be doing has been done for many, many, many years. It's some basic overclocking or just dialing in what it is that you want to do with your graphics card for, doing creation of elements, modeling, rendering, or, if you're a person like me who does gaming and you do work on the side, this is a really good way to sort of like maximize or optimize your GPUs. So for a particular task, you can set some presets and save some money so that you're not overworking your card when you don't need to. And you can also get some extra boost out of your card when you do need that. So we're going to leave everything just by itself at the moment. And as long as you've downloaded and installed the Kombustor as well, you'll see right here, there's a little button that says Kombustor. If you don't see this sort of like setup here, or you don't like this and you want to have a different sort of setup, you can hit this little gear icon right here. And you can go over to the user interface and you can see here I'm using, let's see, this is traditional and I'm using the MSI Cyborg Afterburner skin by Durex Design. You can use a whole bunch of different ones here and it's pretty cool because you can kind of like set this up however you kind of want this to be for looks or for monitoring. So I'm going to hit cancel, but if you do change this, you can hit the apply button right here, okay? So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to look at sort of a baseline of what's going on with our card. So if we click this Kombustor icon right here, it's going to pull up this little window right here. And what this does is it basically does some stress testing of our card. There's also some stuff for your CPU. Unfortunately, I can't see some of the stuff on the side here. For some reason, there's some weird stuff. But you can see here there's GL and then VK. So this is OpenGL and Vulkan. So two different types of just testing out your GPU depending on the API, which you don't really need to know what that means. It just means that there's different ways of testing that GPU depending on what sort of system you're running. And if it's a game, it might be using Vulkan API, for example, and then other things might be using OpenGL. So that's the only thing that that really designates. So what we're going to do here, let's actually click on this PBR donut. And so resolution, you can change this if you want. I'm just going to keep it as it is. And you can see here GPU monitor because I only have one GPU. And we can click this button here that says run stress test. And it should open up this little window here. And depending on the resolution, it will be larger or smaller. And you can see here, I can actually change the size here. But basically, it's running a continuous rendering of this particular object. And you can see down here in the bottom, it says OpenGL, and it gives you some information. And if we look over here at the MSI Afterburner, you kind of have this, not kind of, but you have a sort of display of what's going on here. You can see the temperature that your GPU is getting to as it's rendering. And you can see the clock speeds. So you can see here there's a base and there's a boost. And if you look right here where there's white, that's the base speed. And the boost speed is the blue one right here. That's the little dial. What we can do here is we can basically change the settings to sort of give our card extra boost in certain areas. So we're only going to be dealing with the power limit, the temperature limit, and the core clock here. Memory clock I'll talk about, but I don't really need to use this for my card, but you might need it if you have a lower VRAM card. I have a RTX 3090, so 24 gigs of VRAM is a lot, and I really don't need to worry about running out of memory for pretty much any project I work on. But you might need this depending on what scene you are building in Blender, or if you're editing 4K footage or something like that, you might need this. So basically what this does is it's giving us a sort of benchmark. And you can see here there's a FPS, but really what we're looking at is the speed that the card is running and the temperature. And you can see that it's getting up to 81 degrees. Now, if I was very concerned about the temperature of my card, I can actually change the fan speed. And you can see right here that it's set to auto. And if I click this button and I actually click and drag this speed up here and click the apply button right here, you might hear the fan increase in my room, although this is a pretty quiet cooling solution on my GPU. But basically, if you have a desktop GPU, you can control the fan speed. If you see this grayed out and you can't actually adjust this, that's because you're probably using a laptop and there is not a separate fan for your GPU. It's probably all integrated all together. And in that case, I would say you might have to do something different than using this to adjust your fan curve. So what we did here, you could see that it dropped from 81 down to 77. But what we can also do is we can take this temperature limit here and we can change this by either clicking and dragging this up or clicking and dragging this down. And you can see there that there's this link. And if you take this up all the way, you can see that the power limit stays at 100. But if I take it down, it then takes the power limit down as well. So the temperature limit and the power limit are kind of linked. And you can unselect this and change how it's working, but I would say just leave it as it is. I'm not talking about doing extreme overclocking or undervolting it or in this video. I'm just talking about ways that you can actually um, make this work for you when you're either working on projects, doing some renders, or doing long term renders, or if you're just not doing any projects and you just want to play a video game and not use a super high powered GPU to play, like, I don't know, some sort of low resolution game, for example, like FTL or something. So if we close this down here and let's mess around with some of these here. And you can see that when I close that down, you can see the megahertz jumped way up to like 1950. Just keep that in mind because sometimes I have seen that when that happens, if when it jumps up, when we do increase our core clock, sometimes that causes a an issue. Okay, depending on the program. So I have noticed that as an issue with at least my video card. So what we can do here is we can actually take the temperature limit, and I know that for my card, and you can look this up by doing a Google search. I know that for my card, 91 is actually safe. If you run it this high, it's actually safe. And I have a case. If you have not seen it, I do have an unboxing video for the RTX 3090 that I have where I show you what my computer case is like. It's kind of an open air design, very easy to cool everything that's going on inside the case. But yours might not have that going on. You might have a very, very closed off case that doesn't have good ventilation, in which case doing it this high might be an issue for you. And you might want to keep it a little bit lower. But I'm just going to put it up to 91 just because. Okay. And what I'm going to do also, I'm going to keep this fan speed at 100. And I'm going to take this core clock here and I'm just going to add 50. Okay. And I'm going to press on this apply button. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click this run stress test again. And you can see that now the megahertz right here, it's higher than it was before. And if I were just to click and drag this, you can see those arrows are moving around. Okay, so it's going way, way up. I'm at like, plus 500 or something. And you can see it's not really changing the megahertz because I haven't hit the supply button. And then if I drag it down, you can see that I'm actually going lower than its actual speed, which would be good if I was trying to just kind of like keep this from, using too much of the power. Okay. Like if I wanted to save money by not using so much of the overall power draw for this GPU, you could bring it way down here. But, I put it at a positive 50. Let's actually change it to like a positive 100. And I'm going to tell you, don't do what I'm doing. Just listen to what I'm saying first, and then you can do your own experimentation. But I'm gonna click this apply button. You can see here 1755. I'll click the apply, and let's close this down and run it again. And you can see that now it's running at a higher speed. So if I were doing testing to see really how much I wanted to push this thing, okay, what I would do is I would basically do what I did just now. I would close this down. I would add some of this core clock megahertz right here. And I would just keep adding 25, maybe 50, and then running the stress test for about a couple minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. Usually you can tell immediately if there's going to be a problem because it will crash. Sometimes your computer or sometimes crash your desktop. Now, that being said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That is a safety feature that's built in that will not allow you to destroy your card. Okay. And all of that is just part of testing the limits of how much you want to actually push your graphics card. I don't necessarily recommend extreme overclocking because that does involve unlocking the core voltage and basically increasing the amount of power that goes to your computer, or sorry, that goes to your GPU. So I don't necessarily recommend that, and I actually can't with my card because I don't really want to, but there are cards that do allow you to do that. I'm not going to do that. Now, when you do this, just get it to where, if you press the run stress test and it seems to be working pretty well, and you have it kind of stable, run it for like 10, 15, 20 minutes and just make sure that it's actually going to run at that particular speed, and then you will have a really nice setting, and then you can save your file, your profile by clicking the save button and then clicking one of these here. Now, I actually let's just set this back to 0 and set this back to 83, and I'm just going to click on the 1 here and apply. Let's just save that again. Now, I actually don't need to do an overclock, and I'll show you why I don't need to do an overclock, at least for when I'm rendering out of Blender, and I'll explain that to you in a minute, okay? But if you wanted to, you can actually increase the memory clock. So I would do the same thing, just increase this incrementally over time to try and get a little bit more memory out of your card and see if it is going to run without crashing. Okay, so just easily just keep increasing that. And I'm going to press this back to auto really quick. And what auto does is it basically just increases the fan speed depending on the temperature limit here. And you can see here there's this little button. You can see it says priority, either the power limit or the temperature. I would say to keep it on the temperature because you really don't want to necessarily have this up really high. Changing it to the power limit will kind of help to keep the sound lower for the fan if you really don't like the sound of the fans in your on your GPU that are running, and if it's annoying or something like that. Of course you can, change this up. But that's basically my suggestion, is keep this on the temperature limit, because to me, having the room heat up, or your box, the case that everything is housed in, keeping that at a really nice degree for temperatures for your CPU and your GPU is, in my opinion, better. Now I'm going to show you one of my settings that I use. If I click 3 here, this is one of the settings that I use when I am just, working on some low resolution images, or if I'm doing something that doesn't really require the full usage out of my card. So you can see here I have the power limit down to 65%, which then brought the temperature limit down. And I could unlink these and just change this up, but I really don't need to. And basically, what this does is it saves me money when I'm playing video games that don't require the full usage out of my card. Or if I'm working on projects that really don't need to just have like a super blast of speed on the GPU. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at a project. So this is Blender here, and this works, as far as I know, this kind of works with anything. As far as understanding how this is going to work here with a graphics card when it comes to doing things that are production related. Okay, so I'm actually going to close Kombustor. And you'll remember that 1695 or whatever, that was sort of like the, 1700-ish was kind of like the area around which the combustor was showing the speed for the GPU. Okay. So if I take a look at this here, and I have this basically set to the viewport here, you can see it's set at 0. So that means that it's going to keep rendering samples. Okay. And we're going to just take a look at how this reacts over here. We're just going to kind of monitor it. Okay. So we're going to change this to the rendered view and wait for it to initialize. Okay, so you can see there it started, but if you take a look over here, you can see that the megahertz is up to 1900. 1935 is what it shows here. And this is on this particular setting. And from what I can tell and what I understand from talking to some other people, NVIDIA cards, and it's possible that AMD cards do this, but I'm not 100%, so don't quote me on that. Basically, with certain programs, it will run these renders as like basically does its auto overclock, if that's what you want to call it. The base speed and the boost speed that you would normally see set for game for like video games and stuff like that don't necessarily apply. So when you're looking at your render speed inside of Blender or some other programs that work in this same way, you can see that you don't necessarily have to do overclocking to get extra boost out of the megahertz of your particular project. So you can see I'm moving around the scene here and it stays at that 1905. Now, if I change from this profile here where you can see the power limit and all this sort of stuff here, if I go to this one that we did before where we saved this, and I click the apply button so that we're actually using this profile, and we move around, and let's go to the camera view here. You can see that it kind of stays right there. It's at 1905. So it's kind of running very, very steadily. Okay. And we could, at this point, we could actually increase the core clock. Now it's already kind of overclocked, like I said. So, it's already running at sort of this higher speed than what we were seeing when we were using Kombustor. Okay. But if I take this core clock here and I change this to add 50, that's actually just do 25, just to be safe. If I add 25 and I click this apply button here, you can see 1905, I click that. You can see there it just boosted up a little bit more, okay? So be careful if you have set a overclock profile by using Kombustor, and then you open up something like Blender and you try to use that same core clock, it will go way past what you expected. So that's just something I discovered when I was sort of working with this and coming up with my profiles that I use. It doesn't necessarily keep it stable, and it doesn't always mean that you're really going to get that much more usage out of it. Now, that's my 3090 that I'm talking about. I know that on the Radeon 7s that I had, when I did overclock my GPUs, I did find that there was a significant increase. But I'm just saying, maybe for you, if you're like me and you have this type of card or something similar going on, you may not actually see a render speed increase when you are overclocking your GPU. Now, a lot of people may ask me, okay, cool. Like, I can see that you can overclock the card. You could get some savings out of it and stuff like that. What do you really use it for? Someone might ask me. What I really use this for, and what I like MSI Afterburner for, is number one, you can monitor the temperature of your gear, of all of the components inside of here. You can set this. So if you go in here and you choose a different skin, for example, if I go to the user interface and I go, Let's see here. If I go to, I need to find one that actually has all of the stuff. So this one right here. So if I go to this one, you can actually see there's a lot more information here on the side, and you can see the usage, the temperature. You can see all kinds of other things that are being monitored at the same time. So if I'm running a render for a couple days, for example, I may want to come in here and see what's going on with the temperature because there may be something overheating. There may be some throttling going on. What you should see is some very steady numbers here. You shouldn't see a bunch of really wild stuff if you're doing long renders over time. Okay, so it's a really good way to monitor that. But the other thing is, you can see here that I still have the fan speed set at max, and you may hear it in the microphone right now. I keep it at max when I'm doing long term renders because it ensures that it's going to be kicking that hot air out of my case as much as possible. So when I'm doing long term renders, either it be for, or whether it be for like a few hours or for a few days or something, having that fan speed up really does help to keep your case cool and keeps your components from sometimes overheating, or just overall saves some wear and tear on your card and all the other stuff that you have inside of your case. So that's one of the things that I do. The other thing is, like I said before, depending on the situation. So let's actually change this. I'm going to go to settings here, and I'm going to go back to the other one because it's a little bit easier to see what my settings are doing. So user interface, let's go back to this one. So this is a different one, but it's similar. If I go to this setting here, where I set my power limit down and all this sort of stuff, I may have found that if I'm doing a render of a scene that doesn't really require a whole lot of usage of my card, but there's a lot of frames. You know, there might be like 1500 frames for an animation. I might set it to this, where I might take the fan speed and just take it off auto and push it all the way up, but keep this power limit and keep the temperature limit down because I really don't want to use that card more than I need to. And you should be doing test renders in Blender or whatever it is that you're using. You should be doing test renders to see really what you can get away with it as least energy usage as possible, but also optimizing for speed. So you kind of have to like play a game of, you know, how fast can I render it versus, you know, how much am I actually getting versus the amount of power that's going into it. Because overclocking, for example, will use more energy and you might not see any actual gain in the speed. So those are my recommendations for doing this. Now, this may not be the best for you. You know, you may have a really like, you know, old card that's like a 2 gig card, and some of this may or may not help you. But hopefully you get some usage out of this, especially when it comes to reducing the power draw for doing long-term renders, or if you do need to increase the speed because you have a lower powered card or something like that. Hopefully this helps you achieve some faster results for you, and you can get some bigger projects done in a lot faster time. So, one quick side note, this little startup button right here, I don't actually recommend using this because it can cause some issues if you do set some different profiles and it does crash your GPU or your desktop or something. When you use it, you might have forgotten that you have that set. And so every time you open up Blender or something like that, it might be causing some issues for you. Or if you're starting up a game or something, there might be issues. I don't recommend having any of them set up as startup, but that's really going to be up to you. I do think that every time you open up your desktop, you should think about whether or not you're going to be doing some sort of project related task or something. And then you can set your gear, whether it's the quick CPU that I talked about before, where you're doing CPU optimizations, or if you're doing your GPU optimizations, you should really think about that before you do it. And again, I really don't recommend having these particularly set for startup. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned how to overclock your card and to optimize the settings based on what it is you're trying to achieve with your creation software, whatever it might be. Please take a moment again to like and subscribe to the channel to make sure that you keep up to date on the newest videos that are released, and I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.